When rescuers found this giant street cat, they thought they knew his story. But what happened next at the shelter left everyone speechless and changed one lonely woman's life forever. Clancy had been wandering around someone's house, hoping to find leftover food and a safe place to stay. His orange coat was somewhat patchy from old wounds he got while living on the streets, and his green eyes always seemed to hold a deep sadness. However, it was his gentle, unusual meow, rough, squeaky, and full of personality that made him special. When the woman living in the house first heard his meow, she was amazed. She had never heard any cat make sounds like that before. When she showed the cat to her husband, they started joking that he almost seemed like he was actually speaking. This wasn't just any homeless cat. This was a cat with a special voice. A cat that seemed like he wanted to communicate something important, and before long, he would. The big, lovable cat's special ability was going to be discovered soon. The caring woman began putting out food and clean water for him, and Clancy discovered a small sheltered spot to rest close to their house. The woman noticed that Clancy didn't want to leave, and it made her heart ache, thinking about what kind of life he must have had. Clancy was a cat that had spent almost all his life wandering the streets, marked by scars, made tough by the harsh outdoors, but somehow still gentle inside. The orange giant, with his big round cheeks, had experienced more hardship than most creatures ever would, making it through the dangerous city streets of eastern Oregon for almost 7 years. Nobody knew for sure if he had ever lived in a real home or felt the care of someone who loved him. Life had been cruel to him. His body showed marks from many fights with other homeless cats, and he was tired from constantly having to survive outside. But despite all these difficulties, there was something special about Clancy that made people pause, take a second look, and feel happy. In a world where stray and wild animals were usually ignored, Clancy's playful, chubby face made people feel warmth toward him right away, just like the woman who had noticed him. The cat appeared so thankful for the safe place he had discovered with her and her husband. The woman realized she needed to do everything possible to help Clancy find a real home. She started calling nearby animal shelters, but she heard the same disappointing news each time. All the shelters were already full, and since Clancy had always lived on the streets, finding someone to adopt him would be really difficult. They just didn't have space for a cat who might need to stay there a long time and would require lots of help and training to learn how to live in a house with people. There was also always the worry that Clancy's years on the streets might have made him impossible to tame. But the woman and her husband had seen with their own eyes how calm and loving he could be. However, no matter how hard she tried to convince different shelters, nobody would agree to take him. One morning, the kind stranger who had been leaving food for Clancy saw that he wasn't feeling well. His fur looked duller than before, and his body appeared weaker and more fragile. Clancy usually loved to bump his head against people when he saw them, but that day he barely had enough energy to stand up. It was heartbreaking to see the gentle giant looking so pitiful. Clancy needed medical help immediately. The stranger wrapped him carefully in a blanket and brought him to a small local rescue center, one of the few places they hadn't contacted yet. The shelter wasn't impressive, just a small place without many resources that could only give him temporary care. But it was somewhere Clancy could rest safely. However, with Clancy's mounting medical needs, this small rescue simply couldn't afford the extensive treatment he required. Exchange the shelter workers immediately fell in love with the giant talking cat, but they understood he needed much more care and attention than their small, overcrowded shelter could provide. They conducted medical tests to check Clancy's health and were surprised by what they discovered. Clancy tested positive for feline immunodeficiency virus, also known as FIV, which is common in outdoor cats who have lived in harsh conditions and gotten into many fights. Additionally, his body showed evidence of damage that told the story of years spent surviving on the streets. His old scars were everywhere, some rough and jagged, others faded, covering his orange fur like a road map of his difficult life. His teeth were in awful condition because of poor nutrition and no dental care. Many were rotten and causing him excruciating pain every time he tried to eat. He also had a bladder infection that had probably gone untreated for months, adding even more suffering to his daily existence. Even with all these health problems, Clancy had stayed a gentle giant. It was obvious that this poor cat had never known any life except the streets. But despite all his medical issues, Clancy was different from any street cat the shelter had ever seen. Cats who had lived their whole lives outside truly wild cats were usually nervous and afraid of humans. They were completely independent, having learned to depend only on themselves to stay alive. Many had never experienced human kindness and didn't know how to respond to it. Clancy was completely different. Even though his beaten-up body told the story of his harsh life, he was affectionate and warm. He wanted attention from people and would even seek it out. Every time a shelter worker came near his cage, his eyes would brighten and he would rush over, hoping for pets and affection. Clancy was a complete puzzle. Seemed like even though the streets had been his home for so many years, Clancy had never given up hope that someday someone would take care of him. Now that he had a safe place, that loving part of him was becoming even stronger. The shelter staff started noticing the same special thing about him that the woman who had been feeding him noticed. His meow sounded almost like human words and brought joy to everyone who worked there. But there was a serious problem. With all of Clancy's medical needs, the small shelter simply couldn't afford to take care of him properly. The shelter knew that animal shelters all across Oregon were struggling with too many animals and not enough money. But they were determined to find this cat the help he deserved. They believed that eventually Clancy would make someone a wonderful pet, but first he needed proper medical treatment. They contacted the cat adoption team, known as Cat in Sherwood, Oregon, and hoped desperately that this organization would be able to accept Clancy. Sorry for the interruption. Before we continue with the story, I kindly ask you to like the video and subscribe to this channel. It is very important for us. Thank you very much. When Heather Sabata, who works in communications and development at CAT, heard about his situation, she couldn't say no to letting this gentle talking cat come to their facility. Wanted to meet this unique cat herself and see if his meowing really did sound like actual words. Before long, Clancy was brought to CAT, where he finally got the medical care he desperately needed. He was neutered, got treatment for his bladder infection, and had urgent dental surgery to remove the decaying teeth that had been torturing him with every bite of food. After several weeks of medical care, Clancy was finally feeling much better. So much better that he started talking, even more than before. His squeaks and chirping sounds became the daily background music at the shelter, and the staff couldn't get enough of his strange conversations. By this time, every single person there had fallen completely in love with him. And now that he was getting healthy again, they desperately wanted to find him the perfect family. After so many years living on the streets, he deserved a warm house, a comfortable bed, and someone who would spoil him with love. However, even though they all adored Clancy, they knew finding him a home wasn't going to be easy. Sure, his giant teddy bear-like body was adorable and cuddly, but he was getting older, and most people preferred to adopt young kittens. Additionally, having feline immunodeficiency virus meant he would need regular medical checkups and treatment for other illnesses that FIV could cause, and he would have to live by himself indoors to keep the virus from spreading to other cats. He was asking a lot from any potential adopter, but soon Clancy would surprise everyone, and the shelter staff would discover a way to make the public fall in love with him. One afternoon, while Clancy was exploring his new temporary home, something incredible happened. He was relaxing in his usual place, enjoying the warm sunlight coming through the window, when a volunteer came over to give him some attention. Clancy reacted the way he always did, with his quirky, scratchy meow. He was always excited to see someone visit his cage and would always respond with a head bump and sometimes even roll over on his back. When he wanted belly rubs, he purred contentedly, but then something changed in the sound he was making. His meow became clearer than it had ever been, and the volunteer could have sworn she heard him say one incredible word. From his small mouth came a sound that was just like the word hello. "Did you just say hello?" the volunteer asked in amazement. The volunteer stood completely still. Surely this had to be just a coincidence, or her imagination. Cats don't really talk, right? But Clancy looked up at her with soft, loving eyes and meowed again. This time the sound definitely resembled the word hello. They had all joked. Before that, Clancy often seemed like he was having real conversations with them. He was certainly a very vocal cat, but this was something completely different. The volunteer laughed and gave the happy giant some extra ear scratches before running off to tell everyone what she had heard. "You guys, Clancy just said hello to me," she announced excitedly to the staff. News traveled quickly around the shelter about the giant talking cat who seemed to speak actual human words. This wasn't just his quirky rough meow anymore. Clancy was truly special. Nobody believed the volunteer at first, but then they began recording their interactions with the lovable cat, and there was no denying that Clancy seemed to be trying to have real conversations. The shelter had discovered Clancy's special appeal, the thing that would definitely make people more interested in adopting him despite his age and health problems. Nobody would be able to resist this chatty cat. They began uploading videos of Clancy talking with the volunteers, and thousands of people watched, fascinated by Clancy's affectionate personality and amusing little conversations. Nobody could believe this was a cat who had spent his whole life living on the streets. Among the people who watched the videos was Sandy, a woman from Oregon who had been following Clancy's story since the first post appeared online. Sandy had always loved cats, especially ones that needed extra care and attention. When she saw Clancy's video, her heart jumped with excitement. She knew immediately that she had to meet him in person. There was something about the way he made his little chirping sounds, the way his eyes lit up when he talked. It felt like Clancy was speaking directly to her. The shelter had been honest about all the special care this giant cat would need, but none of that worried Sandy. She just knew she could give Clancy everything he needed, a safe place where he would be loved and pampered for the rest of his life. Sandy called the shelter, and before she knew it, she was driving to meet the orange giant face to face. When she arrived at Cat, her heart was beating fast with excitement. Sandy had always owned cats, but just a few months earlier, she had lost her beloved pet to old age. Her house had felt painfully empty ever since, and she was just starting to think about looking for a new companion when Clancy's first video appeared on her screen. It felt like destiny. She didn't have any other cats at home, and he needed someone with experience and patience to give him a good life. Sandy felt certain they were meant to find each other. The moment she walked inside the shelter, she could feel the excitement of finally meeting Clancy the talking cat. She just hoped they would connect with each other. Heather guided Sandy to the area where Clancy was resting. There he was, the big orange fur ball lying on his favorite spot as if he had been waiting just for her. His bright green eyes looked up and he made a small chirping sound to acknowledge his visitors. Sandy knelt down beside him, gently reaching out her hand, and Clancy, always the perfect gentleman, bumped his head against her with a soft thud, his favorite way to greet people. He purred loudly, rubbing his head against her hand, and let out a rough but clearly affectionate meow. "Hello there, handsome," Sandy said softly. "Are you ready to come home with me?" As Sandy held Clancy in her arms, for the first time, she was overwhelmed by how gentle he was. He was bigger than she had expected, with a solid warmth that made him feel like a living comfort blanket. His chubby cheeks were even more adorable in person, and his purring was like a soothing rumble against her chest. She knew without any doubt that this was meant to be her cat. From the moment he first meowed at Sandy, the gentle giant hadn't stopped chatting. Was like he had so many things to tell the woman who might finally give him what he had been searching for his entire life. "I think he likes you," Heather observed, with a smile. It was clear to everyone watching that these two belonged together, that Clancy had finally found his perfect match. From the instant she had seen Clancy, Sandy knew he would be coming home with her. But feeling him snuggle into her arms made the decision absolutely final. She couldn't imagine leaving without him, never experiencing his affection or his funny little conversations again. She wanted this to become part of her daily life. She was ready to offer Clancy a real home and give him the best life possible. "I'd like to adopt him," Sandy told the staff with tears of joy in her eyes. The adoption paperwork was completed quickly, and soon Clancy was heading to his permanent home. Sandy carefully prepared everything: cozy beds throughout the house, accessible litter boxes, and plenty of toys for the former street cat. But Clancy needed little entertainment. He craved love above all, and Sandy provided it abundantly. He became the king of the house, following Sandy everywhere while chirping and meowing as if sharing important secrets. During quiet, sunlit moments, he would make those remarkable meows that sounded like real words. "Hello, Sandy," he seemed to say during their morning routine, never failing to surprise her. In all her years with cats, Sandy had never met one quite like Clancy. He was truly one of a kind. "You're my special boy, aren't you?" Sandy would tell him every day. Rather than needing an adjustment period, Clancy settled in as if he'd always belonged there, as though he'd been waiting his entire life for this moment. Sandy felt grateful to be the one chosen to make his dreams finally come true. Did you enjoy this story? If you found Clancy meowing outside your door, would you have helped him or walked away? Let us know in the comments below. If you like the story, subscribe to this channel and leave a like. Love doesn't care about scars or age. Just needs a chance. Thanks so much for listening. See you in the next video. Have a great day.